When a woman stumbles upon an antique mirror at a flea market, she is immediately drawn to its unique vintage beauty. She buys it, unaware that this seemingly innocent purchase will unravel her life. At first, the mirror only reflects her apartment, but soon subtle differences begin to appear. Objects are misplaced, and the atmosphere feels heavy. As time passes, the reflection starts to show strange, unfamiliar figures. What starts as a curious anomaly soon turns into a nightmare, as the mirror begins to reflect a past she never knew existed and perhaps never should have remembered. On a rainy afternoon, Sarah wandered through the local flea market, her mind distracted by the stress of her day-to-day life. Amid the clutter of old furniture, trinkets, and antiques, one item caught her eye: a vintage mirror with an intricately carved wooden frame, worn with age, but still exuding an eerie charm. She couldn't explain it, but something about the mirror drew her in. It seemed almost alive, reflecting the world around her in a way that felt unsettlingly real. After a brief conversation with the vendor, she made the purchase, convinced it was a perfect addition to her new apartment. The mirror was placed against a wall in her living room, where its reflective surface captured the warm glow of the sunlight streaming through the window. For a few days, everything seemed normal, but soon, Sarah began to notice subtle differences in its reflection, small, almost imperceptible anomalies that made her feel uneasy. At first, Sarah brushed off the slight inconsistencies in the reflection, as her imagination running wild. But as the days passed, the differences became harder to ignore. Objects in the mirror would appear ever so slightly out of place. An empty chair might be slightly turned, or a book would be on the wrong shelf. It wasn't that the reflection was distorted, but rather that it didn't match what she knew to be true. The colors of the walls seemed richer, almost too vibrant, and the lighting in the reflection looked harsher, casting strange shadows that weren't present in the room. One evening, after returning home from work, Sarah stood before the mirror, her gaze lingering on the reflection. She noticed the subtle flicker of the light above her couch, as though something invisible had passed through it. It was almost as if the mirror was alive, and it was beginning to show her a version of her apartment that didn't quite exist. It started with a flicker, just a brief moment when Sarah glanced at the mirror and thought she saw someone standing behind her, someone who wasn't there. At first, she dismissed it as a trick of the light or her tired mind playing tricks. But over the following days, the figures in the reflection grew more distinct. Strange people began appearing in the mirror, dressed in old-fashioned clothing, their expressions distant and ghostly. Sometimes they were standing in the background, staring blankly at her. Other times they were sitting as if frozen in time. One night, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, brushing her hair, when she noticed a woman in a dark, flowing dress standing just behind her. The woman's face was obscured, but there was something unsettling about her presence. Sarah spun around, but the apartment was empty. She turned back to the mirror, her heart racing, only to see the woman still standing there, her eyes now directly on Sarah. The strange occurrences in the mirror grew more unnerving as Sarah began to notice something else. At times, the reflection seemed to match her apartment in ways that went beyond what was physically possible. On some days, objects in the reflection appeared in the exact same places, down to the smallest detail. Yet, there were moments when things seemed different, as if the reflection was capturing her apartment at a completely different time. One evening, she returned home after a long day at work, only to find the mirror reflecting her apartment. But the lighting was dimmer than she remembered. A lamp that she had turned off earlier was now glowing softly in the reflection, its light casting a strange eerie glow on the walls. It was the same apartment, but not the same. There was a subtle, almost imperceptible shift in the atmosphere. Sarah tested the mirror further. She left a glass on the kitchen counter before leaving for a short walk. When she returned, the glass was gone, yet in the reflection, it remained. The more she observed, the more it felt as if the mirror was not just reflecting her apartment, but pulling from an alternate version of it, one that existed outside her understanding. The boundaries between the real world and the mirror world were beginning to blur. As the days went by, Sarah began to feel an unsettling presence whenever she was near the mirror. It wasn't just the odd occurrences in the reflection that made her uneasy, but the overwhelming sense that she was being watched. Every time she glanced at the mirror, it was as if eyes were following her, even when the reflection appeared empty. The feeling was subtle at first, a slight chill running down, her spine or the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. But soon it became more persistent, a constant weight on her chest as she moved around her apartment. One night, while reading a book in the living room, Sarah felt the unmistakable sensation of being watched. She looked up from her page, her eyes drawn to the mirror across the room. For a split second, she swore she saw someone's face in the reflection, a figure standing in the hallway, just outside her vision. But when she turned, no one was there. The sensation intensified with each passing day. She would catch glimpses of strange shadows moving just beyond her peripheral vision, always near the mirror, as if something or someone was lurking just out of sight, waiting for her to notice. The mirror had become more than just a reflection. It was a window into something that seemed to be waiting, watching, and waiting for her to acknowledge its presence. At first, Sarah thought it was her mind playing tricks on her. A book on the shelf would be out of place, or a cup that had been on the kitchen counter seemed to have shifted. But the more she noticed these discrepancies, the more unnerving it became. The objects weren't just slightly misaligned, they were moved in ways that didn't make sense. The cushion on her couch, which she had arranged neatly, would appear thrown out of place in the reflection, almost as if someone had been sitting there. One morning, after returning from her jog, Sarah found her favorite mug on the dining table, facing the wrong direction. She distinctly remembered leaving it in the kitchen, but it wasn't just the cup. Her keys, too, were placed on a shelf by the door, when she knew she had left them on the hallway table. Every time she walked past the mirror, it felt as though the reflection was showing a version of her apartment where objects had been moved in her absence. Disturbed, Sarah began checking every item before leaving the apartment, but no matter how careful she was, something would always appear out of place. The reflections weren't just showing her a different view of her apartment, they were hinting that something or someone had been there, rearranging her life without her knowledge. The more she observed, the more the mirror seemed to take on a sinister role, as if it was controlling the space around her. Frustrated and terrified, Sarah decided she had had enough. The mirror was no longer a beautiful antique. It had become a source of creeping dread. It wasn't just the strange figures in the reflection or the sense of being watched. It was the feeling that the mirror was alive, manipulating her reality. She couldn't shake the thought that it was somehow controlling her apartment, her life, and maybe even her mind. One evening, Sarah mustered the courage to get rid of the mirror once and for all. She wrapped it in an old sheet, intending to take it to the thrift store. But when she returned home later that day, the mirror was back, sitting exactly where it had been, as though it had never left. Her heart raced in panic. She had clearly remembered leaving it at the store, but somehow it had made its way back to her apartment. Desperate, Sarah tried to break it, hammering at the glass with a heavy object. But when the dust cleared, the mirror was still intact, untouched by her efforts. With no other option, she attempted to throw it out, only for it to reappear, this time placed on the wall in a different room. No matter how many times she tried to rid herself of it, the mirror always found its way back. It was as if the mirror had a power of its own, one she couldn't escape. The most chilling change in the mirror's reflection came one evening when Sarah stood before it, combing her hair, as she had done countless times before. She froze as she stared into the glass, noticing a woman in the reflection who wasn't her. At first, she thought it was a trick of the light, maybe the shadows playing on her face, but the figure looked unmistakably like her, only older. The woman in the mirror had streaks of gray in her hair, lines beneath her eyes, and an expression that was both unfamiliar and deeply unsettling. Sarah's heart skipped a beat. The woman in the reflection wore her clothes, but her face seemed worn with age, as if years of sorrow had etched themselves onto her skin. Sarah reached up to touch her own face, wondering if she had somehow aged overnight, but her reflection remained unchanged. The woman in the mirror seemed to watch her, unmoving, as if waiting for something to happen. Days passed, and Sarah grew increasingly obsessed with the figure. Each time she looked into the mirror, the older version of herself was there, lingering with a look of quiet despair. As the woman's reflection began to grow more defined, it became clear to Sarah this was no ordinary aging. Something was trying to tell her that her past was catching up to her, and that there was something she had forgotten. As the days wore on, the mirror's reflection began to show Sarah more than just the older version of herself. It started revealing disturbing memory, fragments of a past she didn't recognize. One evening, she stood in front of the mirror trying to calm her racing thoughts when a scene unfolded before her eyes. The reflection showed her as a child, sitting on the floor of a dark, musty room, her face twisted in terror as she clutched a teddy bear. The room felt suffocating, and the air was thick with a sense of dread. Sarah had no memory of this place or time. As the days passed, more memories appeared in the reflection. Images of her being in a car accident, standing in a dark hallway with a woman she didn't know, and moments of screaming in fear, trapped in a room that felt strangely familiar, yet distant. The memories were disjointed, fragmented, like pieces of a puzzle she couldn't quite put together. Every time Sarah tried to confront the mirror, she was overwhelmed by flashes of these disturbing scenes. It was as if the mirror was revealing a hidden part of her life, one she had long since buried or forgotten. The more she saw, the more she realized. The reflection wasn't just showing her an older version, it was showing her a version of herself that had been lost, a past that she had never truly understood. The unsettling memories, the strange people, the haunting presence, it all began to culminate in a terrifying realization. One night, as Sarah stood before the mirror, her gaze fixed on the older version of herself, a chilling thought struck her. The reflection wasn't just showing her a version of herself, it was pulling her in. The more she tried to escape the reflection's grip, the more it felt like she was being drawn toward it, as if the mirror itself had become a portal into another reality, one that she could could never leave. Sarah pressed her hand against the glass, feeling an unnatural coldness radiating from it. Her heart pounded in her chest as the reflection seemed to reach out to her, beckoning her with an invisible force. She jerked her hand back, but the sensation lingered, as if the mirror were trying to hold her captive. Panic surged through her, and she stepped away from the glass, her breath quickening. But the more she moved, the more the reflection seemed to mirror her actions, perfectly synchronized, yet it wasn't her. She realized that she was no longer just observing the reflection. It had become a part of her, its presence intertwined with her own. Desperately, Sarah tried to pull away, but it was as if the mirror was claiming her, trapping her within its dark, twisted version of reality. The boundaries between her world and the mirror's were fading, and she realized with horror that she might never escape. Sarah's last moments in the real world blurred as she found herself standing before the mirror, her reflection no longer a distorted version of herself, but an entirely different person, a woman she didn't recognize yet somehow knew. The older version of herself now stared back with hollow eyes, a silent warning, as though trapped in the same reflection she had once inhabited. Sarah's breath caught in her throat as the realization dawned. The mirror hadn't just shown her past. It had consumed it, taken her memories, her essence, and woven them into its dark fabric. She reached out one final time, but the cold glass swallowed her hand, and the world around her began to fade. The apartment, her life, everything she had known, became a distant memory, slipping beyond her grasp. The mirror's surface rippled, as though the reflection itself was alive, pulsating with an eerie energy, and then all was still. The apartment was empty. The mirror hung on the wall, its surface clear and pristine, showing no signs of the darkness it had once reflected. Sarah was gone. The mirror had claimed her, and now it waited, silent and eternal, for the next soul to glimpse into its depths. If you enjoyed this story and want to see more spine-chilling tales like The Mirror's Reflection, make sure to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss out on our latest videos. We have plenty more horror stories and mysteries coming your way. Also, leave a comment below and let us know what you think of the story. What would you do if you were in Sarah's shoes? Don't forget to share with friends who love a good thrill. Thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more if you dare.